Strategy is implemented through projects. Every project should have a clear link to the organization's strategy. That's the first two lines in the chapter of your book for Chapter 2. And it gets to the core of what's the strategic management process. Within strategic project management, there's a requirement that every project be clearly linked to the strategy. The reason for that is that resources are scarce. We want to be able to respond to what's going on in the external environment, and so having that linkage there allows for us to allocate the scarce resources and to make sure that projects that we're undertaking are addressing those external environmental issues. In dealing with strategic project management and strategic management itself, you need that strong linkage among the mission, the goals, objectives, strategy, and the implementation of the projects. One way to visualize this process is to take a look at this diagram on the slide. You can think of the top level as upper management going through the process of a SWOT analysis, addressing external environmental opportunities and threats, looking into the internal strengths and weaknesses of the organization, and developing or revising a mission statement. And from that mission statement flows the new goals and objectives for the organization. So once we got goals and objectives, we can actually look at the portfolio of choices that we have to achieve those goals and objectives and develop a strategic process for implementing the projects that feed into those goals and objectives. So even though you look at this from a top-down flow, really the bottom line is those projects better flow back up to the goals and objectives that the organizations are trying to achieve. You can think of projects as being classified into three distinct types: compliance projects, operational projects, and strategic projects. Compliance projects are projects that you have to do. There are laws, regulations, rules, industry standards, or something that says, you know what, no matter what, we have to do this project. A good example might be the EPA requiring some reduction in emissions, which then now require you to have a project to put new scrubbers into your smokestacks. Good example of that. Operational projects are just that, projects that feed into the operations of the organization. So if you're an organization that is in a production environment and you have a project involving a new production line or a new process in a production line, typically those are classified as operational. If it's a new product line and the new product line is feeding some strategy, it might cross over into strategic projects. But usually strategic projects are reserved for those projects that are lining up or linking with new strategic initiatives, new goals, new objectives for the organization. Within a portfolio management system, there are several selection criteria we need to look at. We need to look at all the financial criteria, things like payback, net present value, internal rate of return, as well as the non-financial and maybe the things that are a little less harder to classify. And using financial and non-financial selection criteria, we can come up with a way of scoring the projects and force ranking them into way so that, given that we have limited resources, we want to pick the best projects that are going to give us the most bang for the buck, so to speak. And so using some sort of a multi-weighted scoring model will do just that. First, looking at the financial models, we have the simple payback model, which just takes and looks at how long it will take for an investment to pay off based on either cost savings or cash flows, and picking the project based on the shortest possible payback. It's really just something, when you're just using the simple payback model, all you emphasize is cash flow, which is a key factor. But there's some limitations. We all know money has a value over time. Sometimes we don't have cash flows outside of the investment period, so we're really not looking at the right financial picture, and of course not looking at whether we can get a required rate of return or profitability out of a particular project. So in the simple payback model, we don't have all those things that we'd like to have, but it's very easy to calculate, doesn't require a lot of work to do. Using a net present value model to determine whether you have a financial viable project, we use the required rate of return for the firm and use that factor in discounting any future cash flows. We sum up all the future cash flows and add that to the initial project investment to figure out whether we have a positive net present value or a negative net present value. Positive net present values imply that the project is meeting that desired rate of return, and negative ones indicate that we haven't met the rate of return and are typically rejected. The higher the net present value, all things being equal, that would be the project you want to take. It has a higher rate of return. The formula at the bottom of the page is sort of messy to deal with, and there are simple Microsoft Excel solutions that help you get to that bottom line calculation. You may want to look at, in your book, at a particular figure. I believe it is a figure, or excuse me, Exhibit 2.3 that shows you how to do these calculations within Excel. Otherwise, you can use a financial calculator, for assuming you know how to use that, to calculate cash flows and discounting cash flows. Besides the financial payback criteria and models, we have to look at the possible non-financial strategic criteria. In many cases, we're looking to capture larger market shares, and that might be a reason why we might accept a project that doesn't meet our required rate of return. Maybe we're trying to look to make it more difficult for competitors to enter the market. Maybe we're looking for a product that will sell at a loss, so that all these other things that you need for that product will increase the sales for overall. I think the new type of coffee maker, the Keurigs, are a good example of that. Maybe we're looking to develop core technology that will be used in that next generation, so we're going to take a loss right now so that we can develop the technology that later on down the line will show promise or profitability. We might undertake projects that are financially not necessarily viable, but we're looking to reduce a risk of unreliable suppliers or dependency on these suppliers. And maybe we're trying to avoid a must-do compliance project in the future by getting ahead of the curve and stepping in on a project that will prevent government intervention and regulation. There's lots of ways to hash over the information that you collect about a project. Some companies use checklists, and they use some form of questions to review potential projects and determine their acceptance and rejection from a checklist. Others go ahead and look at a lot of factors and have a model, a multi-weighted scoring model, if you will, in place to score out the projects using several weighted qualitative or quantitative selection criteria. And that way you can take all these different projects and kind of even out the playing field and allow for a direct comparison by evaluating all projects to the scoring system. It's an exercise you're going to get to practice when you do the film prioritization case. That's at the end of the chapter. But let's take a look at this scoring model a little bit further. Right here is an example of a screening matrix for projects. And as you can see, first along the top line are the criteria for the project. Things like staying within our core competency, whether it's a strategic fit or not, whether there's an urgency there, things on meeting sales goals, things on meeting defect goals. So lots of different categories. Where's the financial one? Return of investment of 18% plus. So it's only one of many factors. So for each one of these criteria, a weighted value is assigned. So we're going to weight the category stay within core competencies to have a value of 2, a weighted value of 2. Strategic fit, we're going to put a value of 3 for that, and so on. Then for each project, 1 through, well, they go through project N on this slide, but for each project we're going to score for each of the categories or criteria. We're going to give a value of 1 through 10, and maybe we've already identified what ones look like. You know, what when we give a project a 1 for this category, what are we talking about? So there's a few more layers that you need to put numbers to these criteria, but after a while, those that are trained to do this within their own organization start doing this pretty well. And so what you can see when you have a score for a particular category times its weight, and you sum up all those values, you can get a weighted total, which is the last column you see there. In that last column, it's simply a score times weight plus score times weight for every category. So the 66 was arrived for project 1 by adding 2 plus 24 plus 4 plus 13 plus 0 plus 6 plus 15. Hopefully you saw where those numbers came from. Those numbers I just said were just the weight of the particular category times the score. And so you can see that after putting several projects through this process, some stratification of the data and some differences between what are clearly good choices and what are probably pretty bad choices comes to light. And you might even get that 1, 2, or 3 projects that you can actually handle with the resources you have available out of this process. A lot of things in project management are process oriented, and so we wind up with a lot of process maps, and this process map is a good example of that, the project screening process. So however your project proposal idea comes into the organization, and we will talk about a process for that at some point, there needs to be some data collection and information about what we're going to do with the project. We'll go ahead and do a whole analysis of where this fits in, the strategic fit, return on investment, payback, and risk. That will feed into getting all the data and collection necessary. So then we'll actually evaluate the product using the project selection criteria that we've already established, and either abandon it or pursue it. If we're going to pursue it, then we actually want to go and do a little bit more work. Take a looking at the priority team that will evaluate it, reassess it. So there's multi-steps before we actually assign the project and get to the point of accepting the project. And companies need to be really, really careful with how projects get through the process and being assigned priorities, assigned resources, assigned project managers. All those things come into play because of the scarcity of the resources necessary to get projects done. So it's good to have a process in place, a place where projects can be rejected along the way, a place where after we accept the projects, we make sure the resources are there to do the projects. We put the resources in place, we give it budgetary numbers, we assign a priority to it so we know if we need to pull back where this will fit into that priority list, ultimately get the right project manager on the job, and always, as the project's going forward, evaluate the progress. Like a lot of our friends in marketing, we like the 4x4 matrices to identify where our projects are at. And if you think about the plotting technical feasibility on our y-axis and the present value given success or commercial potential from a low range to a high range, we can put this. You can see this 4x4 matrix identifying the 4 categories of projects within our portfolio of projects. Just to identify what these are, bread and butter projects typically involve some evolutionary improvements to current products and services, things like software upgrades, manufacturing cost reduction efforts. Pearls are those things that represent commercial advances using proven technological advances. Seems like the next generation integrated circuit chip, advances in subsurface imaging to find oil and gas, those are in that pearl category. Oysters involve technological breakthroughs with high commercial payoffs, maybe things like new kinds of metal alloys fit that criteria, or using new DNA sequencing for treating diseases. And white elephants are projects that at one time showed promise but are no longer viable. Maybe things where you're saturating a market too much, or you've lost to a competitor in terms of being first to market. That might turn your project into a white elephant. Researchers have reported that organizations often have too many white elephants and too few pearls and oysters. And so to maintain the strategic advantage, researchers recommend that organizations capitalize on the pearls, eliminate or reposition white elephants, and balance resources devoted to the bread and butter projects and the oyster projects to achieve a balance and overall alignment within your strategic plan and mission. So that pretty much wraps up